We're going to start competition girls A and B Synchro 3-meter board. First team on the board, Cecilia and Anna. For execution, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 6.5. For synchro, 6.5, 6.5, 6, 5, 5.5. Jessica and Libby. For execution, 6, 5.5, 6, 6. For synchro, 6, 6.5, 5.5, 6.5, 6.5. Isse and Simai. For execution, 7, 6.5, 6.5, 6. For synchro, 7, 6.5, 6, 6, 6.5. Wilma and Emma. For execution, 6.5, 6, 5, 5.5. For synchro, 6.5, 7, 6.5, 7, 6.5. Anna and Sinje. For execution, 6.5, 7, 6, 7.5. For synchro, 7.5, 8, 8, 8, 7.5. Bayu and Ella. For execution, 6, 6.5, 5.5, 5. For synchro, 7, 7, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5. Round 2. Cecilia and Anna.
got fire in my pants, you about to burn your hands.
For execution, 5, 5, 5.5, 4.5. For synchro, 5.5, 6, 5, 4, 4.5. Jessica and Libby. For execution, 5.5, 5, 6, 7. For synchro, 5.5, 6.5, 5.5, 5.5, 6. Ese and Simail. For execution, 6.5, 5.5, 6, 6. For synchro, 6, 7, 5.5, 5, 6. Wilma and Emma. For execution, 5, 5, 5.5, 5.5. For synchro, 5.5, 5.5, 6, 5.5, 6. Anna and Sinje. For execution, 7, 6, 6.5, 6.5. For synchro, 8, 7.5, 7.5, 6, 6.5. Bayu and Ella. For execution, 5.5, 6.5, 6, 6. For synchro, 7, 7, 7, 8, 7. Cecilia and Anna.
I'm sitting here in the boring room. It's just another race in the afternoon. I'm wasting my time, I got nothing to do.
For execution, 5, 5, 5, 5. For synchro, 5.5, 5.5, 6, 5, 5.
I'm driving around in my car.
Jessica and Libby. execution, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5, 6. For synchro, 6, 6, 6.5, 6, 6. Esse en C-mite. For execution, 6, 5, 6.5, 5.5. For synchro, 7, 6.5, 7, 6, 6. Wilma en Emma. For execution, 5, 5.5, 4.5, 5. For synchro, 5.5, 5.5, 5, 6, 6. Anna en Sinje. For execution, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5, 6. For synchro, 6.5, 6, 6, 7, 6. Bayou en Ella. For execution, 6, 6, 5, 4.5. For synchro, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6, 6.5. Round 4. Cecilia en Anna. For execution, 5, 6, 6.5, 6. For synchro, 5, 5.5, 6, 3.5, 5. Jessica and Libby. For execution, 6.5, 6.5, 6, 6. For synchro, 7, 7, 7.5, 7, 6. Esse en C-mite.
do.
6.5, 5.5, 6, 5.5 for execution. And for synchro, 6.5, 6.5, 6, 5, 6.5. Wilma en Emma. For execution, 5, 5, 3.5, 4.5. For synchro, 6, 5.5, 5.5, 6, 5.5. Anna en Sinje.
Anna.
For execution, 5, 5.5, 2, 2.5. For synchro, 4.5, 5, 4.5, 5.5, 5. Bayu en Ella. For execution, 6.5, 6, 4.5, 5.5. For synchro, 6, 6.5, 6.5, 7.5, 6. Round 5. Cecilia and Anna. For execution, 5, 6, 6, 6.5. For synchro, 6, 6.5, 6, 5.5, 5. Jessica and Libby.
Ready? Arms. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
For execution, 6, 5.5, 6, 6. For synchro, 6, 6, 6.5, 6, 6.5. Esse en Simai. For execution, 5.5, 5.5, 6.5, 5. For synchro, 6, 6.5, 6.5, 7.5, 6. Wilma en Emma. execution, 6.5, 6, 6, 6. For synchro, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, 8, 7. Anna en Signe. For execution, 6, 6.5, 6, 6.5. For synchro, 7.5, 8, 7, 8, 7.5. Bayou en Ella. For execution, 3, 4.5, 3, 3.5. For synchro, 4.5, 4.5, 4, 5.5, 5. This was the last dive in this competition. Thank you, judges. Thank you, secretaries. Next competition will be boys AB synchro 3-meter board. We'll start in quarter of an hour. 13:32.